All right. Well, hello there. How are you? Okay, so the first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about what a proposal is, just to kind of remind you about that. Hopefully you can see this here on your screen. So a proposal, remember, so this is looking at chapter 21 in your text. Remember, a proposal is sort of thinking ahead, kind of moving forward. Remember, like it's a solution to the problem. So this is what ought to be done. So I won't go through this whole thing again. I know there's another video out there for this, but remember, so this is that first sort of sample proposal that's at the beginning of chapter 21 that talks about kind of a new approach to healthier living. And just very briefly, this was a proposal about a guy whose issue was, we need to live life healthier. In the past, maybe we've just sort of had kind of a mundane lifestyle, living year to year, just kind of, especially as Americans, how it is. We just, maybe aren't particularly healthy. We live year to year, just being, well, kind of unhealthy. And so what this guy proposes to do is to think about every year concentrating on what we can do to live healthier. So he kind of starts his essay by sort of talking about the problem that, we in America aren't particularly healthy people. That's kind of how he starts it. He sort of says that, look, you know, we are overdue. The United States are overdue to start thinking about being healthier. The lifespan isn't what it used to be. By 2034, we're gonna start sort of, I don't know, dying off. We're not going to be as healthy as other countries. In fact, his thesis here says we need a fresh approach to start thinking about health before we can improve it. And so the rest of his essay has all these solutions, all these new ideas to what we can do to live healthier. Okay? He even has a chart with solution after solution after solution of what we can do to live healthier. And then he ends his essay with sort of a conclusion saying, kind of like effectively, there you have it. This is what we need to do to live healthier. Okay? Next week, actually, you're going to read a couple more essays. Won't get into them too much, but just so you're going to see so many of these proposals are called proposals, right? Next week, you're going to read a couple. Next week, you're going to be reading one on a proposal about the National Mall, right? The National Mall is that kind of stretch of land between the Washington Monument, that tall pointy thing, and the Washington Capitol in Washington, D.C. And this guy is writing a proposal that talks about, we need to replace the mall, because right now it's just, there's a bunch of, I don't know, grass and displays and stuff like that. And he is proposing a solution that we need to go back to what it was originally, which was a bunch of wildflowers, and kind of bring it back to what it was, originally. Back historically speaking, we need to go back to replacing the mall with wildflowers and, make it as beautiful as it used to be, not, have all these 21st century chemicals and blah, 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 blah. So effectively, he is talking about rewilding the National Mall. Okay, so that's his proposal, right? So he's got solutions on what would make. There's a picture of the National Mall there, right? You've probably seen, you've been there, maybe you've been there, I don't know. But fixing or proposing the National Mall to make it, what it should be. And what he says is, just put a bunch of wildflowers there, make it really cool looking. Not a bad idea, actually, right? So that's his solution, right? Just grow a bunch of wildflowers there, right? Kind of an interesting idea. You're also going to be reading another proposal talking about, let me just switch to it real quick. I didn't see that. I don't know how to get rid of that now. Darn it, doesn't matter. Actually, I can do this. Sorry. Going to be reading another proposal on stairs. This is going to sound stairs. What's to propose about stairs? Well, this guy, this lady, actually, Jonna Keller, is talking about stairs. And these days, she's going to talk about is, a lot of people these days thinks about, stairs as far as green energy. healthy living, sustainability, right? Walking upstairs, it's a good idea to just kind of think about health and all that stuff instead of taking the elevator and all that stuff. Let's take the stairs, right? A lot of buildings these days are putting in bunches of stairs and things like that. Well, but then she says, what about, there are a large swath of people who can't use stairs, right? The disability type people, ADA, we got to think of the ADA, American Disability Act. So she's proposing solutions to, we need to consider uh, people who might not be able to use stairs. So she's got all these solutions for like non-stair type places, alternatives to stairs, if you will. Right. So it's another sort of proposal. So you're going to read a couple of examples of proposals next week to kind of get the idea that, again, the whole idea here is solutions to ideas, topics that you came up with. So how does this relate to you? Well, last week you submitted a very good paper. I was going to stop the share here and bring up your paper. Let me get rid of this stuff. Let me find yours here real quick. So this was your paper here. I'm just going to share the screen here really quick. So you'll remember this. This was the paper that you submitted last week, right? Talking about talking about addiction and how, right, here was a thesis you used and how really the system is failing. The system is failing addicts, pretty much, right? More specifically, you wrote how your eyes were really open to the fact that how badly the system is failing addicts with a lack of treatment, mental health evaluations with repeat offenders, and those offending for the first time. And so this was your paper. This was your exploration of an issue, right? Obviously, a very personal issue to you. You have lots of research, great research, right? So this was your topic that you explored. So where you're going to go next with this is okay. This is a very important issue to me, but so where do we go to fix it? Remember, that's the whole idea of a proposal. So where do you go next? What ought to be done about it? So what you're going to want to do is think of solutions to this. What might be some solutions? Where might be some ways to go with this? So some things you might want to think about is maybe come up with ideas to, or think about ways to, oh, I don't know, expand access to treatment. Maybe there might be ways to reform the criminal justice system. Maybe there might be ways, and again, that you might know of a million more of these than I do. I'm just kind of trying to think of some things off the top of my head. Maybe there's ways to improve mental health support. Maybe you can, I don't know, address social and economic factors. Maybe there's ways to encourage policy and system changes for, treatment or, addicts with lack of treatment. All these things, all these different types of solutions you're going to want to come up with. So in the first part of your paper, in fact, let me go back here real quick. Go back here real quick and go back to this guy. So you remember our textbook here. So let's do the, oops, actually, I don't want this part. I'm gonna go back here and go back to, this is our chapter 21 again. So a little bit later in our chapter, it talks about, how to put the essay together, ways to organize a proposal. So in this section, it talks about, okay, this is kind of how you're going to craft or put together your paper. So you want to introduce and explain the program, explain the problem. So the first part, kind of like the introduce, can't talk today. The first part of your paper would be the introduction. So you want to introduce it. So maybe just like maybe the first section, the first paragraph or so, you'll say almost like a summary of your first paper. There's definitely a problem with addicts. The system's failing. It's obviously caused trauma to many people's lives, including my own. Right, just sort of just a basic, there's no narration in there, no more personal narration. We did that on the first paper. Now you're just briefly describing the problem, explaining the problem again in maybe one or two paragraphs. It's just going to be the first section. And then after that, you're going to start identifying solutions, talking about the solution, and maybe again, expanding treatment access, reforming the criminal justice approach, maybe improving mental health plans or support for addicts, addressing economic factor, whatever it is. Like I said, you probably have lots of ideas. You probably know some ideas. You might have to do some more research to find um, some of these solutions. Maybe there's people you can interview on this who might know, have some ideas of their own. But that's where you go for this. And then remember, and then the end, the call for action to reiterate, that would be like the conclusion. You might say something like, as tragic as this as it is, as much tragedy as, addicts can cause people, their solutions exist. Solutions exist. And just sort of reiterate your proposed solutions. Solutions like access to treatment, like reforming the criminal justice system, like, all those solutions, just sort of briefly reiterating them to kind of drive the point home that the solutions do exist, you know. So anyway, so that's kind of how this next paper is going to be crafted. You're just basically coming up with a solution to the topic that you just brought up in your last paper. Okay? Anyway, hope this kind of makes sense for you. If you need some more help, please let me know. Please reach out and I'll try to help you as best as I can. Hopefully this was a little more helpful to you. Okay? Anyway, good luck. Keep me posted, and we will talk with you later.